I know what's coming.
The carriage scene.
The carriage ride.
Yes.
Everybody's seen it. Everybody loved it.
I'd love to know the numbers on like how many times that scene was watched over like the rest of the show.
I mean, we got to start with the carriage scene.
It's almost like there you go.
Carriage scene. I just need to ask that.
I just want to say the carriage scene in front of your faces because I'm still getting over it myself.
Oh.
That was some good work.
Thank you.
Go like this. I'm just gonna go like this.
Yeah. When the carriages are rocking, don't come a knocking. That's what they say.
Following the release of Part 1, Bridgerton's carriage scene became somewhat of a phenomenon.
The carriage scene.
Carriage scene.
The carriage scene.
The carriage scene.
The carriage scene.
The carriage scene. The carriage scene.
The carriage scene.
The carriage scene.
The carriage scene.
But what exactly is it about this scene that so firmly captured everyone's attention? At the beginning of the scene, Colin and Penelope's emotional states are so wildly out of sync with each other, and as the scene progresses, we slowly witness them move to the same page.
Penelope.
I do not wish to speak with you.
Please.
The way that Penelope assesses Colin here is interesting. There's almost a hint of pity as she looks him up and down before letting him inside. Like the audience, Penelope has never seen Colin this blatantly out of control. He's frantic, panicked, out of breath, literally begging her to let him inside. There's a kind of desperation here that he's never displayed before, which flips their familiar dynamic on its head. Here, Penelope is the one more in control, and Colin is kind of at her mercy. The first shot we see inside the carriage shows that they're worlds apart, as Colin is bathed in warm light and Penelope is skulking in the cool colored shadows. Whether this was intentional or not, this is a great visual representation of how they enter this conversation. Colin driven by his passion, and Penelope driven by her sadness and resignation. Penn makes a point to irritatedly call out to the carriage driver, saying,
We will stop at Bridgerton House first.
The irony of this being, since they live directly across from each other, no actual extra stop is necessary. But Penn, annoyed as she is, takes advantage of this opportunity to emphasize her frustration through this petty action. Though the push and pull dialogue in this scene is a staple of the romance genre, for their particular dynamic, there's something refreshing about feeling that, at least on the surface, Penelope wields the most control as of right now. The way that she coolly snaps out lines like,
What do you want? What business is that of yours?
gives insight into her headspace. She's fed up, she's incensed, and she's also determined to stay the course and not give in to Colin. This also demonstrates that Penelope is oblivious to what's unfolding before her. Despite him chasing after her carriage on foot, she's vexed by his presence and doesn't understand what he's even doing there in the first place. When she poses the question,
What business is that of yours?
this is very loaded. There's so much history between them, so many years of potential resentment being built up over their unrequited dynamic. Penelope has wanted nothing more her entire life than Colin to lay claim to her, but he never has. Which is why his attempt to assert his dominance, protectiveness, and ownership here is excruciating to her. Just as she was starting to finally move on, after all this time, he suddenly feels entitled, which is both bittersweet and extremely frustrating for Penelope. Especially since, as of right now, she's oblivious to his intentions. The line,
When I asked for your help in finding a husband, I did not realize that also meant you might try to deny me one as well.
conveys that Penn, whether consciously or subconsciously, is grappling with a real sense of injustice at this perceived cruelty on Colin's part of not wanting her, but also not letting her be happy with someone else. At this point in time, Penelope is coming from a psychological state of essentially losing everything. Based on the events of the night, she's being forced to reconcile with a lot of traumatic dynamics she's had to face her entire life. Her mom not valuing her or showing warmth, lacking prospects for a better life in love or otherwise, losing the future she's worked so hard to craft for herself this season, and all the while having to reckon with losing her past. She's lost Eloise, and after tonight, almost certainly Colin too. Colin's desperation only becomes more palpable as he tries and struggles to enumerate the ways in which Debling is so wrong for her to justify his sabotage. The way he says,
It is my business because I care about you.
demonstrates that his investment in her and her happiness makes him feel entitled to be involved in this way. The excuses he is able to muster
He will leave you, and he is too particular.
are somewhat lackluster because on the surface, Debling is a good match.
He is just not right for you, Ben.
On the other hand, Colin's entitlement is justified because he's correct in his assessment about their incompatibility. Separate and aside from his own personal stakes in the situation, Colin knows and understands Penn to her core. maybe more than anyone else. He knows that a loveless marriage isn't what she wants, nor what she deserves. Colin can conjure 100 different reasons why she can't marry Debling, but the one he's yet to speak is, because I love you. And yet, it is the one which looms the largest and hangs the heaviest over this entire conversation. Penn is still oblivious to this, though, which causes tension and strife. Neither are really saying what they mean, and they're both confused and frustrated as a result, which forces them to actually communicate and express themselves directly. Luke Newton's stumbling, stuttering delivery shows Colin's exasperation at knowing and understanding something to be right, but being unable to articulate it. He struggles to find the correct words because, at the end of the day, this really has nothing to do with Debling. Penn is visibly resigned at this point. She delivers these lines matter-of-factly, almost as a way to get Colin off her back.
He did not propose.
She's practically begging him not to make this any harder than it already is. Her frustration at Colin's sabotage is twofold, as it comes from the initial slight of having patiently loved Colin from afar only for him to overlook her, but also that even in her attempt to move on, he ruins that as well. Though the audience understands Colin's motivations, there's no part of Penelope which identifies, recognizes, or even considers him reciprocating feelings as within the realm of possibility. And she says as much when she says,
"An idea so preposterous, I do not know what to do besides laugh."
The way she delivers this, throwing this line back in his face, seems like a direct callback to his statement about never courting her. The showcase for Luke Newton's acting is on display prominently from this point forward.
I cannot, because...
But in those 6 seconds without dialogue, the play of emotions across his face is undeniable and offers a wealth of information. The way that he shifts his focus, swallows down his words, twitches his mouth, and shakes his head all convey this. He's terrified. He's in a state of inner turmoil. He's having to brace himself. He's almost talking himself out of doing this. You see his internal struggle as he decides whether or not to go ahead and say this, and you see the moment he decides to jump off the deep end.
What if I did have feelings for you?
The choice to broach this topic in the form of a hypothetical question is interesting, but I think it's indicative of his immense uncertainty and insecurity in this moment. Likely, Colin has never been so unsure about the reception he might receive after saying something. He's juggling not only the fear of being rejected, but of ruining their relationship. In response, Penelope says,
"What?"
Despite only uttering a single word, the tidal wave of emotion is clear. Disbelief, skepticism, hope, fear, hurt. Colin's super vulnerable in this moment. He's terrified, but he sees no other way forward than to just lay it all out there. The tilt of his head and the facial expression that accompanies it inspired significant online debate about what this indicated before the season even came out. There's fear, excitement, regret, sorrow, grief, insecurity, desperation, adoration, and deep desire. The fact that so many different interpretations and analyses of this moment even exist is a testament to how layered this expression is. Here, Colin lowers himself literally and figuratively before Penelope. Getting on your knees before someone is traditionally associated with begging, which he is doing, but he's also humbling himself. With this action, he's acknowledging his past wrongs. He's getting as physically close to her as he can. He's putting himself before her at her mercy. The monologue Colin delivers here sums up his narrative arc for part 1.
I have spent so long trying to feel less, trying to be the kind of man society expects me to be.
He's tried and failed practically his whole life to be what society expected of him. He says,
And for a moment, I thought I had succeeded.
Referencing the beginning of season 3, where he returned with, albeit insincere, confidence, but was met with glowing reception and outward validation. He finally thought he'd cracked the code, only for Penn to, without even lifting a finger, entirely disarm him of his defenses.
These past few weeks have been full of confounding feelings.
He begins his confession saying,
Feelings like a total inability to stop thinking about you. About that kiss.
A detail that I love so much about this is the direct parallel this has verbally and physically to the dream sequence in episode 3.
About our kiss. By you.
In the dream, Colin says,
My entire thoughts consumed by our kiss. By you.
His gaze begins at her lips, and by the end, as he says,
By our kiss.
Shifts to her eyes. In the carriage, as he says,
Feelings like a total inability to stop thinking about you.
He's looking at her lips. Then he shifts his focus to her face when he says,
about that kiss.
The sequence in which he places these two subjects feels significant and seems to indicate a progression in his grasp of his feelings over time. In the dream, in the immediate aftermath of the kiss, that was at top of mind and thus the first thing he says. He was so shocked by his reaction to the kiss itself that his thoughts and feelings about Penelope came as an afterthought, as a direct result of the kiss. Whereas now, in the carriage, after having weeks to contemplate this, he places her first above all else. His understanding seems to have evolved. He sees that it's her, who she is, how she is, what she is to him, that's the source of the feelings, and the kiss was just the thing that alerted him to it.
Feelings like dreaming of you when I'm asleep.
His line about dreams is significant for many reasons, one of which being the recurring motif of fantasies and dreams for Penn and Colin throughout the seasons.
Your love is an unrequited fantasy.
Dreams are grander than you let on, Pen.
Mere fantasies.
Such a world of fantasy. That dream has long since passed.
I would never dream of courting Penelope Featherington, not in your wildest fantasies.
The next is the vulnerability in admitting such an intimate thought. He's letting her into his inner world, exposing his innermost thoughts to her. It also indicates his agony in the past weeks since she separated herself from him.
A feeling that is like torture.
He's been forced to watch her with Debling from the sidelines. And now he's reverting back to sleep as a coping mechanism. He misses her so much and wants to see her so badly that he longs to escape his reality, to meet her in his dreams.
Preferring sleep because that is where I might find you.
At this point, Colin has committed. He's laid it all out before her, and the power dynamic shifts so that she's entirely in control. Now it's just up to her to respond. Her tearful,
Please. Do not say things you do not mean.
is a display of her truest emotions. While she is angry and frustrated on the surface, at her core, the root of all these feelings is her pain at her love for him not being returned. She literally cannot cope with getting her hopes up only for them to be let down again. And she automatically doesn't believe what he's saying out of self-preservation.
But I do mean it.
The earnestness of his delivery, as well as the lighting and blocking of the next line from Colin, indicates how serious he is, not only to the audience, but to Penelope.
It is everything I have wanted to say to you for weeks.
Penelope's response comes from a place of denial.
Colin, we are friends.
She's weary to believe this, regurgitating the familiar and comforting chorus of ideas she's force-fed herself in order to move on from Colin. Just as she's finally wrapped her head around a reality in which her and Colin will never be anything more than friends, this confession calls her whole world into question. Colin replies with,
Yes, baby.
It's unclear how he was going to finish the sentence, but I assume it was something along the lines of, yes, but we kissed. But what I also envision is that Colin, in that moment, realized how juvenile that sounded. That kiss changed everything so fundamentally for Colin that he struggles to understand how it wouldn't do the same for someone else. It seems so obvious to him that he almost scoffs his delivery of it before realizing that, in the grand scheme of things, a kiss is likely not a valid reason to expect a relationship. Colin's obviously embarrassed in this moment. He's searching her eyes and face, trying to understand how he could have been so wrong. He very quickly snaps back into the societally polite version of himself, offering routine apologies, trying to assume propriety. His insecurity is obvious when he says,
I do not know what I was thinking.
As if the entire idea was ridiculous in the first place. Of course she would never reciprocate. When Penn finally puts him out of his misery by saying,
I'd very much like to be more than friends.
his relief is so palpable. It's etched across his entire face and body. You see the shift in his eyes. It's a shift from a look of desolation to one of desire. As he understands this thing, this person he's wanted so desperately, is his for the taking. Now we're moving into the part of the scene where body language is doing most talking. For the physical part of the scene, there's a really great balance of both fervent need and gentleness. In this shot here, they meet each other halfway, which is highlighted literally by the splash of light that passes through them as they inch closer to each other. The lighting of this scene is very impressive in so many ways. Atmospherically and aesthetically, the general warmth of the lighting sets the romantic tone. The play and movement of light throughout the scene, though a very practical reminder that they're in a moving carriage, is also just visually beautiful and interesting to watch. There's also a great balance of maintaining the scenery of this being set at night and thus lacking natural light, with really clever methods to properly illuminate the performances. Colin's gaze as he approaches Penelope is determined and entirely focused on Penelope's lips, whereas Penelope's gaze is longing, shifting from his face to his lips as he inches closer. The anticipation and dramatic tension of this moment is also really excellently punctuated by the score. Copyright restrictions largely prevent me from showcasing this here, but if you rewatch this scene with this in mind, the movement, pacing, and rhythm of the music, where it slows down or crescendos, is also really well timed to the action on screen, both literally and emotionally. There's disbelief as they're coming together, but also the knowledge that they both want this, yearn for this, and in fact dream of it, is out in the open. So in a very real way, this is the first time they're laid bare before each other in an emotional sense. And thanks to the music, performances, and pacing here, this moment feels incredibly delicate and fragile for both characters and audiences alike. They're both tentatively tiptoeing toward it in case it vanishes lest they expend too much effort. This kiss really reflects the synchronicity they're experiencing. They're finally on the same page, and their body language reflects this. They're meeting each other in the middle in every sense of the phrase. They're literally, physically meeting in the middle of the frame, but symbolically, this shows that they're equal partners, both taking the initiative, both admitting that this is what they want. I love the detail that neither of them open their eyes after this first kiss, as if there's a shared and unspoken understanding that they're sure of what they want and they're going after it without hesitation. Pen initiates a separation here, the unspoken reason being that she wants to check that this is really happening. Pen immediately opens her eyes after the kiss to check that it's real, whereas Colin is keeping his eyes closed, trying to savor and live in the moment in case it isn't. As he said, he prefers sleep. This next portion of the scene is potentially the least objectively sexual, but thanks to the performances, it is unconscionably sexy. The reverence and wonder with which Pen tenderly brings her hand up to his face makes it easy to infer that this is a moment Pen has fantasized about. As familiar as they are with each other, this kind of a touch is forbidden and improper within the society. You see Pen acknowledging that and then taking advantage of this closeness and reveling in it. This also serves as a learning experience. Now that they've crossed this threshold, they get to explore and become acquainted with these new parts of each other, both emotionally and physically. Colin's face when she does this is just brilliant, and I have to acknowledge what a unique and intelligent choice this is by Luke Newton. It fits Colin and his character arc so well, which adds so much emotional depth and resonance to this moment. I've seen this expression referred to as touch-starved, which, though on the surface may not seem like an apt descriptor given how much of a ladies' man he's been this season, I have to concur with this assessment in a much deeper sense. The thing that's made very clear by the performance in this scene is that, though Colin may have been touched physically, never has he been touched emotionally and spiritually as he is now. This moment is the culmination of all the things he wants most in the world. Intimacy, connection, purpose, family, to be seen and believed in and understood. And in this one touch, Penelope provides him with all of it. He's realizing that everything he's ever wanted is right there in front of him, and he's in awe of Pen for being the person to give that to him. The facade he upheld at the beginning of the season has left him feeling emptier than ever. And with this touch, Pen fills his cup. This touch nourishes him in a way that's so profound, and it's written all over his face. I find this choice to be remarkable not only because of how well it fits the character, but because of how singular it is. This kind of expression is not commonplace in media. This is the kind of expression that one experiences and understands in real life, not on TV, which is exactly what makes it stand out so much. It feels extremely intimate and real in a way that, if it weren't so sexy, it might be uncomfortable. It's obvious that having an emotional connection is a game changer for Colin. His slack jaw expression as his eyes peruse her face with such obsession and devotion conveys this perfectly. It's as if he's in a state of hypnosis. Having this emotional intimacy imbues the actions with meaning, which enhances his experience and pleasure. As such, there's a heightened eroticism to this moment. Pen is similarly in awe as she's living out this moment that she spent what seems like her entire life dreaming of right before her eyes. They mirror each other as neither of them can help but break out into supremely satisfied grins in total fulfillment and victory. The respective prior sexual experience for both Colin and Penelope is incredibly significant and plays a huge part in this scene. Colin shifting Penelope's sleeve is the first real escalation in this scene. Prior to this, though progressively getting more intense, they were just kissing, which is a concept Penelope has a firm understanding of. This, however, is not. But the thing is, Pen isn't scared. The way she maneuvers her shoulder even shows her active participation as she helps him adjust her sleeve. Both of them are watching intently in anticipation as this moment unfolds before them, giving you the sense that this is a shared experience between them and a first of sorts for both of them. Despite this technically not being anything he hasn't seen before, as Colin does this, his action is gentle, his expression is awestruck, and his gaze is reverent. This is different because it's Penelope. One of the things this scene is able to balance really impressively is towing the line between lustfulness and gentleness. This moment is a good example. It's important to show sexual fervor on Colin's part toward Penelope for many reasons. It denotes a shift in their relationship. It redresses the lack of interest he's shown in her in this particular way in seasons 1 and 2. Showing Colin desire Penelope in this way is very important, but it's also important to imbue that desire with a sense of care given the long-standing affection between them. They've known each other for practically their entire lives, and Colin has already established his protective instinct over Penelope, so that needs to translate here. This moment is a great melding of his respect for her as a person, which he's always had, and his newfound respect for her as a sexual partner. Given all of this, it's important that Colin is worshipful of Penelope, and we see him tend to this with every faculty he possesses. Penelope placing her hand on top of his here shows that she desires this and wants to keep him there. The way that she looks down at their hands exhibits a disbelief, as if you can actually see Penelope acknowledging in real time that her long-held dream of Colin desiring her this way is actually coming true. Then we see Penelope using her chin to nudge Colin back into a position where they can kiss. This is likely an overlooked detail, but it feels so significant to me as it's an overt exercise of autonomy and agency for Penelope. As they make eye contact here, Colin seems resolved, as if his next move is very clear to him. Penelope lacks that clarity, but seems to pick up on the fact that this will escalate by the way she literally braces herself against the window. The moment of Colin asking and Penelope giving consent is pivotal. At this point, Pen seems overcome with emotion, and the fact that Colin pauses to observe her and take her emotions into account shows his deep care for her. You get the sense that to Colin, this really isn't about him, so regardless of what he might want, he needs to reaffirm that she's on the same page because the only way he wants to do this is with her, as a partner. She seems to understand that he's asking her permission, and she alters her expression to reflect this as she nods toward him. She might not understand exactly what's about to happen, but she loves Colin. She knows that as long as it's Colin, it'll be good. She trusts him so implicitly, and it's gratifying to see such a blind faith be honored, respected, and in turn, rewarded, especially when it comes to the gender dynamics at play within the society. He has a lot more knowledge about the act than her, but Pen has all the knowledge she'd possibly need about Colin to know that she trusts him. As he lifts her hem, he makes sure that the tips of his fingers touch her skin rather than the fabric, which is such a careful detail that infuses this moment with a sweetness that could very easily be lost in this type of action. It's as if he's preparing her, reassuring her, making sure that he worships every inch of skin he comes across. The next moment feeling as realistic and impactful as it does is thanks to Nick Lachauclin's performance. It's fully immersive, it's universal, and it's immediately recognizable. In particular, her auditory output, her breathing, panting, sighing, moaning, is simply sublime. As strange as that may sound, the authenticity behind the way she chose to vocalize Penelope's experience is one of the key ingredients that makes the scene so appealing. Yet again, these are not the typical sounds we're used to hearing in TV and film, but instead feel so much more grounded and realistic. This allows for a really easy suspension of disbelief, which lends the scene the feeling of intrusion. The impact of the performances cannot be understated here. The focus remains tastefully centered on the expressions of Colin and Penelope. The action, so to speak, is actually never shown explicitly, only alluded to off-screen. But thanks to the accuracy of these performances, every single movement, every emotion is so visceral. You need only the slightest hint toward the schematics, and the rest is up to the viewer's discretion and imagination. The character choices throughout the scene are so strong. The way that Colin mirrors Penelope in this moment is a great detail. It shows how in tune he is with her, how much attention he's paying to her, how much investment he has in her pleasure, and how much pleasure it gives him in return. He is laser focused on her. He's charting her emotions and expressions at every turn. He also, whether consciously or subconsciously, mirrors her facial expressions and breathing patterns. He's so utterly wrapped up in this moment with her, for her, and alongside her. Penelope, for her part here, is overcome, understandably, and when she gets particularly overwhelmed, her instinct is to reach for Colin. Despite their already incredibly intimate circumstance, she wants to be closer to him even still. This is entirely new territory for her, but the faith she has in Colin is evident as she looks to him for guidance and reassurance. Colin, though very obviously focused on the task at hand, is immediately responsive to Penelope's grasping at him. His reflex is lightning quick as he shifts his gaze to check on her. The stylistic shift to wider shots as this sequence ramps up gives a fuller picture of their overall chemistry and closeness. They're working in concert at this point. They're both extremely active and enthusiastic participants. The performances are pitch perfect with the pacing as their movements increase in fervor, intensity, and desperation. The way Penelope ardently grasps at Colin, almost in a panic, is reflective of her desire to be closer to him, her trust towards him, and her wonder at experiencing the sensation for the first time. There's so many details which lend not only authenticity to the scene, but greatly contribute to the overall sexiness of it. The eye contact, the fevered grip on his hair, the way Colin maneuvers his jaw, the churning of Colin's shoulders, the facial expressions from both of them, the guttural and visceral sounds coming from either of them at any given moment. Another thing that sets this scene apart is that every physical action has such great significance, history, and meaning. It all corresponds to the individual characterization of Penelope and Colin as well as their relationship dynamics. The physicality is a direct translation and representation of the vast emotional and psychological depth and connection between them. It's a full-body experience for both of them in every sense of the phrase, as their physical actions are mirrors of their emotional, psychological, and spiritual connection. There are also so many actions, like this moment of moaning into each other's mouths and biting her lip, that are so intimate and loving in nature. The intimacy of such an action, the specificity of such a circumstance, feels very real. It's not just physical or sexual. It's not just lustful or mechanical. At every turn, it's the most true and full representation of their love for each other, and this is them expressing it. This actually isn't the type of action we often see on screen, but the thought put into the choreography of this scene, and perhaps the trust between the two leads, allowed for these types of details, which makes the scene feel so organic. The sexiness achieved here, despite both parties being fully clothed, is extremely impressive. Quite simply put, there's something almost shocking about how intimate and sensual this scene is. It feels very real. There's certainly no lack of sex scenes in media, but the intimacy, the chemistry, the sensuality, and the connection shown here is extremely rare. I think another small but rather impactful detail is the fact that Penelope is moving along with him. She's working with him, moving her hips against him, which shows her active and willing participation in this situation, even as it's progressed beyond her level of knowledge. The focus on the female gaze and female pleasure does not go unnoticed in this scene. And the fact that, unexperienced as she is, she's able to so boldly participate in this with him shows the level of safety she feels to fully inhabit her body and express herself. With Colin, despite being unable to see his face, there's an urgency and fervor radiating off of him. He's extremely focused in this moment. It seems as though the world could collapse around him, as it sort of does later in the scene, and he wouldn't know a single thing. He's so intent on what he's doing and so determined to pursue and prioritize Penelope's pleasure, he doesn't take notice of anything else going on around them. The slow phasing out of the music as the audio from inside the carriage takes precedence is a great way to add a button to the scene. The performances here are great. The sharp contrast and shift in their positions and expressions, the characterizations of both of them as they realize is so spot on. They move seamlessly from being so into the moment, nothing else exists, to being jarred back into harsh reality seamlessly. The fact that it's Penn who comes to her senses quicker and takes initiative to set themselves to rights aligns with her character as well as the position she holds within society. Women within this time simply had to be much more alert out of necessity. It makes sense that she's much quicker to snap back into reality, whereas Colin looks like he literally ascended to another planet and has no idea who he is or where he is whatsoever. It takes her explanation of their circumstance to even slightly cajole him out of his bliss.
Colin, we're at your house.
Though it should be very obvious given the stopping of the conveyance they're in and the knock, he's much slower to wake up from the spell. The way that he delivers this next line is great. He's confused, exasperated, annoyed, still caught up in the moment, and completely oblivious to the objective ridiculousness of what he's just said. All he knows is that he wanted that moment to continue, and he's annoyed it was interrupted. But the detail about Colin's exasperation that I most appreciate is that he wasn't the one being serviced in the scene. Traditionally, and even in the book, this line would likely be delivered by the person being serviced, so in this case Penelope, but the fact that he holds the same level of annoyance despite not being the beneficiary of the rendezvous shows how much he prioritizes her. The matter-of-fact delivery of this line and the direct gaze he levels at her, brimming with total earnestness, only adds to the humor of the moment.
Could the carriage driver not keep on driving?
It takes Penelope directly laughing in his face for him to register the implausibility of what he's saying. The quick shift in Penelope's expression is great also, as she goes from utter shock, horror, disbelief, and incredulity to utter mirth, amusement, affection, and hilarity. Her laughter sparks his, and this moment between the two of them feels entirely grounded in reality. It's tangible, it's familiar. It brings the emphasis back on where their relationship originated, their friendship. The carriage scene as a whole serves to highlight the sexual and romantic development of their relationship, only for it to be brought full circle when we see them giggling together at the end. The jubilant and innocent delivery of this moment is funny, but also simultaneously touching. Nicola's dazed, out-of-breath delivery of the next line is brilliant.
I think anyone saw us.
But what elevates this moment are the choices she makes for the facial expressions. Her entire face is alight with adoration for the person in front of her, and she has the dreamy, starry-eyed demeanor of someone coming off the high of their biggest dreams coming true. There's something about her choice to bite her lip in this moment that I adore. It's not a choice that I would have ever thought to make were I playing this part, but luckily Nicola did. There's something simultaneously both very naughty and innocent about her making this expression.
I was not paying much attention to anything.
It shows the awareness of how scandalous she's just been, but no remorse or apology. She knows that this thing she's experienced is considered forbidden, but she's too thrilled to feign regret. The subject matter of her potential ruin isn't something to brush off, and she knows that, but she can't help herself after what just happened. Colin's expression shifts quickly from giddiness to severe seriousness. As he looks at Penn, he can't help but mirror the gravity and depth of what just happened between them. With more of his faculties now, he wants to look at her and really see her. He wants to bask in that sight, memorize it. He wants to kiss her, but the desire isn't fueled by anything fickle or flighty. It's not lust or frustration or excitement that pushes him to kiss her. It's his surety. It's his acknowledgement of who she is to him, what this means, and his desire to properly honor that. This kiss is more chaste than many others we've seen in this scene, and that's intentional. It's not a kiss done out of crazy emotions like passion or fear or lust or even happiness. It's a promise. It's a seal. It cements them. He wants her. Not what she can offer, not how she can slake his lust, not how she makes him giddy. He wants her as she is, in her entirety. This is only further confirmed as once the tender kiss ends, he stares at her with a sense of purpose and confidence he's never had before. He knows his next movements as he sets her to rights. I would be remiss, of course, if I did not mention the choice made by Luke Newton to use particular fingers when adjusting her sleeve. This aligns with Colin's characterization of being caring and generous and attentive. He prioritizes the care before, during, and after these intimate encounters, and this is yet another example of that. The devil's in the details when it comes to the scene. It's the culmination and amalgamation of all these really subtle choices which add to the authenticity of the scene and contribute to the appeal. The way he looks at her, so certain, so confident, and then briefly takes a breath before taking action, shows he has a clear vision for their future. He's had a realization, made a decision, and he understands now. It looks like everything has fallen into place and clicked for him. All the while, Penelope is tentative. When they kiss, she kisses him because she loves him and wants him. When he demonstrates such care for her in fixing her, she's confounded. She doesn't understand what such a gentle, reverent respect is like. No one has ever taken such care of her, and she struggles to understand why he's doing it, what he's even doing.
What are you doing?
She's nervous as he steps out of the carriage. You can tell in the way she says his name and watches him leave that a sense of panic rises within her.
Colin?
Colin's full-body perusal of Penn at this point is him basking in this feeling. It's almost teasing. He knows what's happening, and he's so sure about it. He also knows that she doesn't know, and there's something amusing to him about how unsure she is when he's so sure. He simply asks,
You coming with me?
as if what he's really saying should be obvious, as if there's no possible option, no other way for this to go, and she should have known that. She worries about being seen by his family, and he says,
For God's sake, Penelope Featherington, are you going to marry me or not?
I love that Colin looks so youthful and gleeful in this moment. He's unbelievably cheeky, as if all his worries have washed away. He looks so much more at ease, so unburdened. He's so sure at this point that he's almost laughing at Penelope's confusion. Then, of course, we pan back to Penelope, and we see her look of shock slowly morphing into the realization that her wildest dreams are coming true.